Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'm your host, Greg Martin. Happy 100th episode. Hard to believe that we're going on 2 years with the NAUI podcast, and for that, I say thank you. This week, I wanted to take a few minutes and do a brief recap of some of the great shows and people that we've had on. Over the last 100 episodes, we've talked with some of the pioneers of the scuba diving industry, like Dick Long, talking about why he started his company, DUI.
I was about 6'1" and weighed a whole 135 pounds, and I was freezing to death. One day I came to the conclusion that either I had to find another way or something else to do, because there was no way in the world one can keep going into the water like that and suffering that kind of physical abuse and expect to survive the experience. So that's what I did. At the time, very little equipment was available at all, let alone perfected. So I started, in those days we made our suits out of kits. You got rubber in a kit form, and they gave you some rough dimensions of the design. You then trimmed it to fit your size, and then that became your suit.
Zale Perry talked with me about her experiences shooting the Sea Hunt TV show.
You have to realize that we had to put an episode in the can in 4 days. That means it had to be finished and ready to be broadcast. So we worked all day long, 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening, if at all possible, to finish what was scheduled for that particular day. I worked with a great group of people. Oh my gosh, we became a family. The Bridges family was just wonderful.
And Dick Rutkowski talked about how the use of a chamber has changed.
Everybody thinks, well, you got to go back to the depth that we were diving. See, that's not true. If you were diving 150 feet, you'd still be going to 60 feet on O2 and be treated on one of the Navy oxygen treatment tables. We don't use the hydrostatic pressure component as we used to. We use a concept called isobaric counterdiffusion.
Along the way, we've caught up with a few celebrities as well, like Jonathan Byrd and his Blue World TV show.
Being a filmmaker is about telling stories. A lot of people like to call themselves filmmakers when, in fact, they don't make films. They shoot video, but they never edit anything out of it. When you try to go shoot some video and then turn it into something you want other people to watch, you really need to engage them. So you need to tell a story. And telling a story is more important than your video being great. I mean, not to say you want to shoot great shots. You want your shots to be good. But you can't just have the money shot. You've got to have all the shots to tell a story. What I really want to do with every episode of Blue World is I want to teach the audience something really cool about the ocean, but I want to do it in a way that's really engaging and fun, like they felt that they just had an adventure.
I also ran into one of TV's dreadnoughts, Dave Stone.
Basically, we're the Dreadnoughts. We are the Axemen television show on the History Channel. It comes on 9 o'clock on Sunday nights. We are an underwater log recovery specialist team. Basically, we clean the pre-submerged timber out of the rivers and turn it into workable material, hardwood floors and stuff like this. 150, 200 years ago, when there was no roads, what they did was they floated logs down the river. That's how we made towns in Florida. That's how we made towns everywhere. Well, the heaviest, most dense, best pieces of wood sank to the bottom of the river. As they sank to the bottom of the river, over 100, 150 years of them doing this, it builds up. Sand builds on top, and it keeps going. And our rivers become shallower, and everything becomes not as well as what it was 200 years ago. So what we do is we go down and we remove these items back out, restructuring the river back to where it was before we messed it up in the first place.
You know, we've had many discussions about the environment too on the podcast, including a fascinating chat with author Mara Hart about her book, Sex in the Sea.
I was at a cocktail party and I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and we were having a conversation about the differences between men and women and some of the challenges that can create. And one of my friends made a comment. She said, I wish, I could just be a guy for one day and understand what was, going on in their heads and their bodies and just know what their world was like. And I, being the nerdy marine biologist, said, oh, well, yeah, if only we could be like parrotfish, that would be perfect. And, everybody stopped and sort of, there was just this silence and these blank stares, and people were sort of like, what? And I went on to explain, parrotfish start as females, and then that individual transitions to a male later in life, so they know. And it sort of opened up this whole conversation, and I wound up chatting to folks for, several minutes about the sex lives of marine life and all the crazy things they do. And people were so curious and they were so engaged. And then about 10 minutes later, I was, refilling my cocktail glass at another part of the party. And I heard one of the people I'd been chatting to repeating one of the stories I had told and said, hey, did you know fish change sex? Isn't that crazy? And I just thought, that's it. Sex is, everybody wants to know about it, even if they don't admit it, they're curious. And truthfully, sex really is the heart of sustainability. Without successful sex in the sea or otherwise, species stop.
Of course, equipment has come up in the discussion many times, including the use of vintage dive gear. Brian Pennington with Vintage Double Hose talked with me about making new parts for old gear.
I mainly specialize in doing parts and things like that for U.S. divers and Voight double hose regulators because they were the most prolific. They made more than anybody. There's more of those around for, if you need hard mechanical parts for spares, there's more of those around. And they're more inexpensive for divers, to get a hold of because they made them in such prolific amounts.
And of course, there were just some plain fun conversations, like how dive pioneer Hillary Vitters got into diving.
I've been diving for 40 years, and it coincided with my honeymoon, which was 40 years ago. And we were on our honeymoon in Hawaii, in Maui. And one day, my husband Richard said to me, the water is so beautiful. I think I'm going to take a little dive lesson. Why don't you go shopping? And I said, shopping? Hell no. I'm going with you. And he said, and he's not macho at all. He said, honey, I don't think women do this. And without blinking an eyelash, I said, well, this one's going to. So make way.
And a riveting chat with John Chatterton about diving on the Andrea Doria.
The Andrea Doria was practically sinking on the evening news. It was on the cover of Life magazine any number of times, and it really captured people's imagination and when it sank. And of course, Peter Gimbel, his dives people were inspired. The photographs that they took of the wreck. From a diving perspective, it's like, these guys are out there with wetsuits they were gluing together after every dive, and with J-valves and two hose regulators. And, so it was doing 10-minute bottom times and how far can I get in 10 minutes. And then it kind of, the dory itself kind of evolved, and deep air divers were venturing further and further inside. And you had the possibility, the opportunity to go places no other diver had ever been.
And finally, we discussed diving to the deepest part of the ocean with Don Walsh on board the bathyscaphe Trieste.
Jacques Picard and I were test pilots. We were not oceanographers. Our job was to test this thing to make sure it was a safe and productive platform for marine scientists. The Office of Naval Research after due consideration, bought the Trieste from the Picards in January 58 to use it as a way of getting researchers into the deep ocean.
So many great conversations over the last 100 shows, and just too little time to share all of them. So I suggest you maybe make a point of going back through and catch up on some of the shows that you might have missed. Can't thank you enough, too, for supporting the show. I'd love to hear your comments. You can email me at podcast@NAUI, NAUI.org. Podcast@NAUI.org. Well, that'll do it for this 100th episode of NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'm Greg Martin. Thank you for listening. I'll see you underwater.